Hello and welcome back. This is the fourth in a series of 8 short video tutorials demonstrating how Veggie Compass can be used to give small and mid-scale horticultural farmers a much fuller picture of their farm finances than traditional record-keeping systems provide. Whether you actually decide to use Veggie Compass yourself is not as important as learning the concepts this tool allows us to demonstrate. These tutorials are designed to be viewed chronologically, so if you've stumbled into the middle, you'll want to go back and start at the beginning. There are 3 important concepts that we'll bring to light in this tutorial, and they are: 1. Crops may not be the only source of income contributing to your farm's profitability. 2. It's important to keep a record of farm sales by crop and by market channel. And 3, if you're selling through a CSA, what you charge for a share needs to cover the cost of more than just the vegetables you put in those boxes. It's now time to tackle the sales input page. The data that you need in front of you to work on this page might include the following: farmers markets records, your CSA sales numbers, pick sheets, wholesale invoice books, and maybe retail store sales figures, quicken sales reports, etc. Before we talk about the main part of the spreadsheet, let's move over here to the far right and look at this yellow box in the columns R and S. The items you see in red are numbers that you need to enter. The first is CSA income, if you have any. That goes here in cell S6. The next 3 items in black, lines 7, 8, and 9, are protected cells, and they will be generated and filled in by the Veggie Compass once you've input your sales data. Under the total sales heading in column R, you see a list of various other income sources, lines 12 through 16 in red. You are to enter any income that you receive from these types of sources if you have any associated with your vegetable farm operation. The last income source in red is titled Other Income. I use that category to input the compost sales that we have on the farm of $2,000 and rental income of $10,000. These other incomes are pertinent in this Veggie Compass system because the costs associated with them are accounted for back on the previous expense input sheet. And those are there in the form of compost making supplies, the rental house taxes, maintenance, and insurance. If there's other income that is outside of the vegetable farm operation altogether, like a livestock enterprise or commodity crops, then they should not be part of this Veggie Compass spreadsheet. So right away on this sales page, before we even start to calculate the income from the crops sold, you're reminded that other sources of income contribute to the profitability of your farm operation. Now let's skip back over here to column A, where your crop list is entered. Veggie Compass is designed to track the sales and costs associated with 100 different crops or products. You can use as many of those lines as you want to track your farm business. I know that on my farm we actually grow more than the 44 crops that I'll show you, but for some crops the effort of tracking them separately just isn't worth the little bit extra that I might learn. So I've lumped various crops together that are similar in type and in the way that we grow and market them, and that I just don't grow very much of. I've decided to combine some crops in this way. Herbs. This is all perennial herbs that we grow, including rosemary, thyme, sage, chives, tarragon, and so forth. Another category crop here called Chinese greens. These are all the direct seeded Asian type greens, such as all the different bok choys, tatsoys, and choy sum. You need to decide which crops for your farm business are really the most important to track separately. For example, you could choose to track the cost and sales of individual varieties of tomatoes, such as Sun Golds versus Early Girls versus Celebrities, or to track tomatoes by group, such as cherry tomatoes versus paste tomatoes versus slicers. Next, you need to fill in the unit by which you want to track the crop, such as pound, bushel, or bunch. Usually the unit by which the crop is sold is the unit used for tracking, as this is the easiest. But the unit names can be whatever names make sense for you. When thinking about units, you may realize that you'd like to track crops according to different sales packages. For example, you may track carrots sold in different forms. You may track bunched carrots with tops, or loose carrots by the pound, or 3-pound bags of carrots, for example. Just enter each of these as if it were a different crop. On our farm, we still pick and sell some crops using old-fashioned half-bushel pony baskets. We also use black bulb crates for loose greens and bunched vegetables like beets and radishes. As we go through these tutorials, you'll see those names for the units used a lot in my examples. Next, let's look at the columns to the right. Notice they're grouped by color by market channel. As you look at the page, you'll first notice that the names of the market channels have automatically been added to reflect the choices you made back on the expense input page. We're going to skip over the CSA section briefly and talk about the other market channels first. CSA is handled a bit differently, so we'll come back to it in just a minute. For each of the other market channels, there are 3 columns in each section. The first column in the series is where the total sales of that crop in that channel is entered. The next column in the series is where the number of units sold of each crop in each channel is entered. Using those 2 numbers, Veggie Compass will then determine the average unit price for each crop in the third column. While at first this exercise may appear simple, I found that my sales data were lacking this kind of detail. My records are kept somewhat backwards from this math. For example, I know how many items I've sold at markets and the price I got for them, but I'd never figured the total value of each crop per market day or per season. I had to take the total units sold times the price I know that I sold them for and come up with the total value of each crop. This is an example of the kind of thinking and manipulation that you might have to do to come up with the appropriate data to enter into Veggie Compass your first time through. The reason that we encourage growers to enter total sales and units sold instead of doing it the way I did is so that Veggie Compass can automatically adjust that unit price to account for differences in prices that may have occurred over the season or during a market. For example, you may be able to get a premium for a crop early in the season, but you may have to drop that price later when it's peaking and the market is flooded. It's easy to keep that peak price in mind and sort of forget that you actually got less for it a few weeks later when you had to sell the crop at a lower price. In the future, you may consider having a pick sheet and then having a record of what did or did not sell at each market so that it'll be easier to know exactly what did sell. I have never kept track of individual sales of each vegetable across all of our market channels. I do have pretty good records about what sells at the farmer's market each week and at what price because of my pick sheets and my market reports. And I know pretty well what vegetables went into the CSA shares because of the CSA journal that we keep. And I know at what price I value the CSA produce because it's the same as what I sell it at the farmer's market for. I also have an invoice book for wholesale sales, but I have terrible records of vegetable sales at our roadside stand. I've had to make some educated guesses for this demonstration, and this is how I did it. I took my pretty decent yield records and subtracted out all the things that I knew: the farmer's market sales, the CSA sales, and the wholesale sales. And what was left over should either be shrinkage, which is waste, or what we sold at the roadside stand. In the future, I'll make a better record of what goes to the stand and what doesn't sell. This will also help me better see waste in my system and give me the ability to assess ways to manage that waste. Going back over to CSAs now, here's how we address the special situation regarding Csa Sales. The problem arises because the Csa share is sold at a flat rate, not as individually priced items. For example, your Csa share may be $750 a season for 30 weeks, or a value on average of just under $25 a week. The share size and value and mix of crops will most likely rise and fall over the whole season. So while you may plan to provide on average a value of $25 a week, in reality, that's not exactly what happens on a weekly basis. Ironically, many growers actually provide a higher value than what they advertise. This particular Veggie Compass function will allow you to see how the retail value of the Csa crops compares to what you actually got paid to grow and deliver. First, you enter the number of units that went into the Csa boxes over the course of the season here in column E. And then in column C, you assign a value to the particular crops that went into those boxes. I use our full retail price that we can get at farmers markets. And that's because we tell our Csa customers that the value of the vegetables is not discounted if they buy a share. The reason they join Csa is not to get cheaper food, but to have the luxury of getting the cream of the crop without having to be at market at sunrise. Veggie Compass then calculates the average unit price of the Csa crops in column F, just like it did with the other market channels. It also adds up all the values you assigned the Csa crops and puts the total in cell C107 at the bottom of the sheet, just like with the other market channels. Then it gets all fancy and adjusts for actual sales value in the column D. The total Csa income that you entered way over here on the right side of the sheet earlier in cell S6 is now divided by the total value that you assigned the Csa vegetables here from cell C107. This creates a percentage figure that is then applied to each crop to calculate the adjusted sales in column D. I know this is complicated and may be confusing, so let's look at my numbers. For my farm, the assigned value of the crops in the Csa share was $37,080, as you see here in cell C107. For those vegetables, I actually received $39,000, as you see here in cell D107. So I got more money than the vegetables themselves were worth. Hey, that's great, because the Csa is not just vegetables. It's also a service that has costs associated with it. That extra $1,920 that I got helped to cover the costs of running the Csa, namely running the newsletter, managing the membership, and delivery costs that are inherently part of any Csa. If, on the other hand, you're receiving less money for your vegetables than you value them, you are actually subsidizing the Csa shares. At the bottom of the sheet, on line 107, you now can see the total sales for each of your market channels. Again, for many of you, this may be the first time you've seen these sales figures in quite this way. Most growers have a general sense of where they're selling the most product, but sometimes these sales totals, based not only on volume, but also on the value of the products, can be interesting, if not enlightening, to see side by side. The far columns P and Q give the total sales and total units sold by crop. Again, this may be the first time you've seen these kinds of numbers. It may be surprising to you to see which crops are generating the most sales. But be aware that this is only the gross income of each crop. Once you get your data entered in the first 3 sheets of Veggie Compass, which crops are actually making a profit not just generating sales, will become obvious. In the next tutorial, we'll show you how to add information into the third Veggie Compass sheet. This will be the last sheet where data has to be put in, and then we'll get to the fun part where Veggie Compass starts providing juicy information that we growers can use to manage our farms for higher profits. So come on and let's get it done.